has over 25 years of experience in higher education.
I really have more than that. I just say 25 because it makes me sound so old.
Karen has published 4 teacher resource books and is the author of 3 children picture books: Jubilee, USS Alabama, Hooray for the Mighty Eighth, and Mardi Gras in Alabama. So please, let's give a warm Penster welcome to Karen.
Thank you. Well, we are in the midst of refurbishing our home, and so everything is packed away, including the printer. So I was able to get these notes, but I usually will print out my PowerPoint notes, and I don't have them. But can I see the PowerPoint?
Nope.
Can you get it back up, Alan? The mic is on the PowerPoint.
You can stand here.
Can you see it on the screen?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Okay. So do I need to use the mic?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But Alan,
Yeah.
could you come up here, please? Because I don't see
We
PowerPoint.
did have it up.
PowerPoint's gone.
Now that could be a problem, because I don't remember everything on the PowerPoint. And then I think I can right click.
Yep.
Does that need a right click?
You can do that.
Oh, yeah, just do that. Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay. I'm just used to projecting, so this is new to me. Thank you all for having me. I was going to start with telling you a little story. I'm a bicentennial author also, one of 13, and there were 3 of us who were children's book authors, so that was a real honor. But I made a presentation at the USS Alabama about my USS Alabama book. And a couple of days later, the organizer came to me and said, "You made everyone in that room feel like they could be an author." And that's how she said it. She didn't say, "You made everyone in the room feel like you could be an author." She said it as if I cast some kind of spell over them and gave them this false sense that they could be a writer. And I said, well, that's because what I truly believe. I said, I think everyone can be an author. I think where we get hung up is the idea that unless you are a traditionally published author, you're not really an author. And that's what I try to get away from. I do a lot of school visits and talk to children about that because, of course, they're a long way from being traditionally published. And just tell them to find value in everything that you write. We write because we really can't not write. Do you know that feeling? Like if you get an idea in your head, unless you put it down, it's just going to keep bouncing around in there and you can't really function until you get it written down. And that's what we do as writers. I'll have people come up to me and say, how do I get a children's book published? And I'll say, oh, you've written a story for children. How exciting. Tell me about your story. And they'll say, well, I haven't really written it yet. It's an idea. And that's a little bit like me saying I want to be on the U.S. Olympic swim team. And someone saying, do you swim? And me saying, no, but if I'm on the team, I'd start. So that kind of separates us, I think, as writers. So we do it just because we love it or because we can't not do it. And it's not simply to be published. Now, being published is wonderful. It's to be celebrated. But don't be dissuaded, we were talking about that earlier, if a book hasn't yet been published. So my example for that is I wrote, I think it's a wonderful Christmas story. Nobody has wanted to publish it, but every year I take my little Word copy, no illustrations, and I have a basket of children's picture books that are Christmas books. I need to add yours to it. And I slide my little Word document in there, and then every Christmas Eve I will read it aloud to my family. Well, it's kind of syrupy, which is probably why they haven't published it yet. But, and every year I get very emotional as I read it. It's a lot like Love You Forever by Robert Munsch. I don't know if you know that book, Love You Forever, Like You For Always. So as I read it, I get a little emotional, and I see my husband and my son kind of like cutting their eyes a little bit, you know, here she goes. But this year I did not ask to read it. My 22-year-old son said, "Are you going to read that story, Mom?" And I'm like, "Well, if you really want me to." And so as I read it this time, I noticed they weren't getting that reaction. And when I finished, I looked, and my son was just stunned. And he said, "Mom, that is a really good book." So I said, "Okay, so it's for 22-year-olds, because when he was younger, he didn't see the, the emotion in it. But anyway, it's a fun story." And also, I put a book out recently and got a rejection letter, but it was so nice. And even if you get a rejection letter and they say something nice, we're insecure enough that just any kind of hopeful information makes you feel good. So I read it to a friend of mine and I said, "Look, they think my characters are relatable." And she said, "But they rejected it." Like, it doesn't matter. They thought my characters were relatable. So we just take whatever we can from our writing and we just keep going. So don't make it all about being published. Make it about the story. Okay. That's my philosophy. So who has written a book for children, published or not? Raise your hands high. Be proud. Alan, I did not know that about you. I never smeared. That is a lot of hands. I'm so excited. Half of one. That counts. That counts. You have one. And who has an idea for a children's book who has just never written it down? Okay, so that's your homework. Oh, John, you've got an idea. Okay. And then who's just ever read a children's book? Okay, good. So we all have something to relate to. So writing for children can be extremely rewarding. I was going to tell you a couple of stories. We're having all this work done on the house, and the woman doing it has a 7- and 9-year-old. So I sent her home with a copy of the USS Alabama, Hooray for the Mighty A. Signed it, personalized it to her children, everything. She came back the next day and said, "My 9-year-old daughter is just blown away that I'm working on the house of an author, like I'm a movie star or something." I'm like, "Oh." And she said, "She really wants to meet you." And I said, "Well, we can definitely arrange that." She said, "She just can't believe I'm coming over here and working on your house." So it's, it's really nice that children have this idea of authors. And then I had a friend come up at church and he said, we were asking our 6-year-old son what he wants to be when he grows up. Well, my husband was a helicopter rescue swimmer. So that's all the kids want to talk to him about that. And I almost interrupted and said, "Oh, Jeff will be back in a minute." But he said, his son said he wants to be an author when he grows up. And so he wanted him to meet me. I was like, oh, it just doesn't get any better. Now, on the other hand, they are the worst critics. So you have to have very tough skin. If they open your book and they don't like the first page, they'll just slam it shut, toss it aside, and go on. So you can't be too worried about that. Or if you're doing a public book reading, half of your audience may get up and find their way to the Thomas Train table and do that instead of listening to your story. So that's just part of it, but it's so rewarding to write for children, regardless, published, not. Read to your children, your grandchildren. It's just such a rewarding thing to do. Okay, now all of my information is on these slides, so it will be available to you. Oh my gosh, you're missing such good pictures. Okay, so I'm starting out with a picture of me when I published my first book, and I've got pigtails because I was in the 2nd grade, and I wrote stories. I just love to write. And so they were all in one of those like Big Chief tablets. And my mother tore them out and punched holes and put a construction paper cover on it. I have a picture of that. Tied it together with yarn and wrote, on the front I wrote Karen's Book of Stories. And I thought, that's it, I'm published, you know, I'm an author now. And that's kind of what I try to tell children about, is just to take on that persona. So here is my table of contents. My doll, a tree, a tooth, my shoes, the ironing board. I help my family, I go to dancing, play inside, play outside, I got really creative on that one, and Tom the cat. So I tell children, if those are my stories, I bet you have better ideas than that. And their hands shoot up, you know, and they want to tell me all of their ideas. So it started out very simply with my little list of stories. And if you look at the slide, I have an actual story there that I wrote, which is my tooth. And you can read the next slide. I retyped it just as I had written it, and it starts out, I had a little tooth that was very, very loose, L-O-O-S. We tried and tried to pull it out, but it won't come out. We pulled, P-O-O-L-D, and pulled, but it won't come out. So when then we tried it with a string, but it still won't come out. So the next day, N-E-K-S-T, was a school day, and my friend came over to walk to school, and I was brushing my teeth, and something fell out of my mouth, and my friend said, a tooth, and that's my story. Yes, that's right, I had some dialogue in there. So what I was going to tell you about children's books is there are so many similarities with just any other kind of literature. So we have the same genres, and I have the genres listed with examples of books from each genre. So in children's books, even in picture books, we have realistic fiction, historical fiction, traditional tales, such as Red Riding Hood. Most people think that's all there is to children's literature. There is even science fiction. That's a very big genre now in picture books. Fantasy, maybe you've heard of Harry Potter. Okay. Mystery, informational books, including picture book biographies, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, and poetry. Of course, I know there's a lot of poets in here, so that is also a genre in children's literature. Also similar are the literary elements. In children's books, we have theme, a point of view, a setting, a plot, characters, all of those things, just like you do in regular literature. So, my next slide is a little more scratching his head. Then how is writing for children different from writing for older readers? What do you think the differences are? It's not genre, not literary elements. What's different?
Simpler language.
Simpler language. What other ideas? Those of you who write for children, what do you have to do differently?
Pictures, illustrations.
The pictures have to help. If you're doing a picture book, yeah, the pictures have to help carry the story, which can be interesting because you don't always know who your illustrator is going to be, and the illustrator does not always work with the author. So in very traditional publishing, with like the big five, they do not even communicate with each other. So you have to trust that your publisher is going to find an illustrator, and that illustrator can see enough of your story that they can illustrate it. I was very fortunate in my 3 books is that I had communication. The first one, they did not want us to communicate, but she would email the editor, and the editor would have to email the question to me, and I would have to email the answer back to the editor, who would email it back to the illustrator. Finally, she said, it's okay if the 2 of you talk. So actually, Julie Buckner, who did Jubilee, came to Fairhope to take photographs and everything for the illustrations, and while she was here, there was a Jubilee that she and I got to do together. So that was a great moment. Okay, so shorter, I'm skipping one away, simpler language, illustrations, shorter, of course. Anything else? But the topic. Topic might be a little bit different if you're working with a younger audience. Another great thing about doing children's literature is that you constantly have a new audience coming up. So over at Thomas Hospital and maternity ward, I got a whole bunch of new readers coming up. Mary Kay Andrews, who you probably know, very talented and popular, she had to get a new publicist because her readers are growing out, and so she's wanting to do something to appeal to a new generation. Well, if you write for children, that's never a problem, because they're always coming. Okay, so this is how it's different. Your books are going to be shorter in length, and you're going to get this slide, but the essence is that a younger audience has a shorter attention span. And the rule of thumb is to double the age and maybe add a couple of minutes. So if you have a 4-year-old, their attention span is going to be about 8 to 10 minutes. Now sometimes that fades off, because like at my age, I don't have an attention span of 2 hours. But essentially, that's what you want to think about when you're writing for that audience. So these are some categories of books, because we don't look at books for children by genre, because they're the same, but categories. So board books and concept books, those are, you can imagine what those are. Those are about 0 to 100 words, and those are for children from birth to about 4. Your picture story books, which is the category I write in, is for more 5 to 8-year-olds, and I usually say 3 to 8-year-olds, because if you're reading them aloud. And those are 1,000 words or less. And let me tell you, it's hard to keep things to 1,000 words as you're telling a story. The next levels are early, easy, or leveled readers. And these are books that are designed specifically for children in 2nd grade or 3rd grade. And typically, authors like us don't write those because they're done in-house, because they want very controlled vocabulary, and they're not any fun to write. So, and then middle grade novels is for 8 to 12-year-olds. And if you do that, you get a whopping 30 to 45,000 words to write. So I tried my hand at 2 middle grade novels. One is in various stages of rejection and revision. And the other one, I've just about finished a first draft. And I have to tell you, they are a lot of fun to write. So if you're transitioning from writing to adults to wanting to write for children, that's kind of where I recommend you go, because you still get a good word count. Go and read the popular middle grade novels. And middle grade is not for middle schoolers. It's more like 8 to 12-year-olds, so 5th grade. Go to the library, get those books, read them, and I love that genre. And I don't know if you know Stephanie Crow at Page and Palette, but she'll look at me and she'll say, I don't get it. What is it about the middle grade stuff you love? And I'm like, well, you either get it or you don't. I can't force you. But I just think it's a great category to write in. Okay, also different are our themes. So books for very young children are going to have your basic concepts, colors, shapes, objects, letters, and those kind of things. I am kind of working on an alphabet book, so it falls in that category too. As you move up in age, it's things that you might see in books for older readers, things of like being jealous of siblings, sharing, death of a pet, right or wrong, but not in a preachy kind of way. And then even for older children, the universal themes of courage, friendship, belonging, and those kinds of things that the children are dealing with. Another difference is how setting, plot, and language are done. So obviously they're very streamlined. So your setting might be once upon a time, that's your setting, or long ago, or one sunny summer day. So you may only get, if you're doing a picture book, you may only get one sentence that gets to address your setting. So you just have to learn how to break that down. It's a simpler plot, usually has one climax and resolution. Sometimes it could have 2, but very simple. The language is controlled for the age of the reader. There's a great website called readabilityformulas.com, and whenever I'm writing for children, I'll take a passage and I'll plug it in, and no matter how much I think I've gotten it down, it's always for like 18-year-olds, so you have to keep bringing that language down. But that's a really good test for it, readabilityformulas.com. And also, I think this is really interesting, especially in middle grade, your protagonist is 2 to 4 years older than your character. And I saw this explained as you think about children on the playground and how the little children are always trailing behind the older ones. It's that same kind of concept. They want to know, what do I do next? How am I supposed to be? So not so much in picture books, they relate to their own age, but as you get to the middle grade, it's almost like they're using them as a tool for learning about growing up. Then I have a quote by Mem Fox, who is an amazing children's book writer, and she says, in other words, writing a picture book is like writing War and Peace, but doing it in haiku. I thought that was a very, very good way to explain it. So I was going to share some of my books. The first one is Jubilee on the far left, and yes, please. And another nice thing about writing for children is you don't have to stick with any one genre. So I've got 3 books, another one coming out, all different genres. You can just stand there, be my Vanna. Thank you. And the first one is Jubilee. It's realistic fiction about a little girl who wants to see her first Jubilee. And so she comes across the bay and visits with her grandmother, and she meets different friends along the way, and they all give her a different description of what a Jubilee means to them. And then in the end, they get to see the Jubilee. And I love how Julie used the real photographs, because in the book, the little girl has a camera, a film camera, which is great because I take a film camera to schools and explain it to children, and they're just intrigued by that. So that's realistic fiction. And then I did a nonfiction informational book, and that is the USS Alabama, Hooray for the Mighty A. And I got that idea driving to work one day across the causeway, and I was brainstorming and thought, I want a book that tells about how children did something important. And there's the battleship looming ahead of me. And someone had told me one time, I'd heard this story about children collecting money. Now, since I've done the book, I can't tell you how many school children have come up and said, I donated to the, anybody in here remember donating to the USS Alabama to bring the battleship? Thank you for your contribution. I think you're the one that told me you thought you were going to take it on your birthday. Was that you? Somebody told me the story that they were had so much ownership in it that they thought when they had their 8th birthday they were going to get to take their friends out on the battleship.
Well, I do know that I didn't grow up in Alabama, my husband did. But I know that the people that donated got a card that
Yes.
was good for admission. And
Open up the cover, it's in there.
They're still honoring those cards.
They will honor this. They'll honor your card, and yeah, on the end pages you can see the little red battleship. And actually it says as long as George Wallace is governor, you can get it. But now they'll let you use it. You get to go on one more time. They stamp it or something. But yeah, I tell people, I'm like, laminate it, make it a Christmas ornament, something special. And then Mardi Gras in Alabama is my fantasy, and it features Folly, who you see sitting right there. He's behaving himself. Sometimes his head's kind of lobbed over. And this is because so many teachers were asking for books about Mardi Gras that were not about New Orleans. So he goes to all the parades, Mobile County and Baldwin County. It was so much fun to write because I wrote it in rhyme, and that was a first for me. And so the children love it. They can watch Follies. He goes, they kind of look for him on the pictures. Their favorite page is when he gets knocked out by a chocolate moon pie, you know. They just